Okay, well, welcome back. In this video, what we're going to talk about is how to add search functionality to a table. So this video is based upon um, all the previous videos in this playlist, where we've been slowly building out this music library. And as part of that, we had a table with albums in it, different musical albums, the year they released, artist, etc., and some cover images. And if we log in, we could edit, delete the albums as well. Now, what we want to add in, the ability to do a search. So we're going to add in a little search box here. And as part of that, we're going to be able to, so if we type in, for example, the word artist, right? What I want to do is look through all these fields for the word artist. And if it has it, it should be displayed. So hit search, and we only have one song with artist. But if I added in the word, for example, Friday, now we would see both artist and Friday. And the goal of this video is we need to look at this in a couple different ways. So one is, how do we have persistence of data here? What's going on up in our search query up at top? And how can we use that data to filter our list? So let's start with the beginning and this query data at the top. So here in our query string, a typical query string, you can see it says edit user.php with a question mark. And everything after the question mark is basically our query string. And in PHP, that's your get array. And if we want to access that get array, we need to refer to the index in it. So to get access to this information in blue, okay, we need to access the index, which is here in yellow. Okay, so that's the email side. So that's the name. We use the get array, and the name we're going to access is email. And then whatever's inside of the array, here is what we'll get. So the way that this looks in actual PHP is we say email, right? So $ email, we create a new variable called email, and we'll set its contents equal to the get array and whatever's in the email field, right? So that's where that comes from, right there. Okay, see how they match? Now it's similar in the post array as well, but here the big difference is we're going to use the name field. So in the post array, in this case, when we post this form, there's two fields, right? We have two input fields, one for email, one for password. So in our post array, we're going to end up with two fields. So one of the fields is called email, okay? And then the other field is going to be called password. Now, when the user fills in the form and hits the submit button, then that's when the post array gets populated. And if we want to access the elements of that array, you can see what we do is we say email is equal to the post array, right? We get post from up here where it says method equals post, right? If we didn't specify method equals post, this would go into the get array. So post, we're going to access the index called email. And in this one, the index is called password. So you see how we can specify these different boxes just by writing them out. And that's where you'll see one of the more common errors is you'll get an undefined index. So if you spell email, for example, differently here than here, perhaps use uppercase E, then what will happen is, if you use an uppercase E between here and here where it's different, then you'll get an undefined index because this post array will try to look for something with the exact spelling here. So if they differ in any way, you'll get an undefined index. Very common error. But now that you know what it means, hopefully really easy for you to fix. So let's take this one step further. So if we have our little search box here where it says test country, up above we see test country. this is actually a string that's up here. Okay, so our get array basically is test country, and the index that we're referring to is called search terms. Okay, so here a little bit of PHP is if it's not empty, right? So if there is a search term, then set it based on whatever is inside of the array. Otherwise, set it to null. And the reason you have to do this if else is if we tried to run this line of code directly and there are no search terms, what happens is the get array has an undefined index because this will not exist. So this is how you protect yourself from getting an error in PHP. You first check if this field is empty or is not empty, and then you can access it. So up in our query, we have this test. Oops, my apologies. Test plus country. It's one string. But what we need in our SQL is we need to use the word test and we need to use the word country. Two separate things. And that's where this little bit of PHP will come into play. We first check if it's not empty so that we don't possibly generate any errors. And if it's not empty, we can use this explode function in PHP. And what it'll do is it'll actually convert a single string into an array with multiple items. So if we had 10 search terms, our array would have 10 items. So the way that this looks, I'm going to color code it here. You can see this is going to be our SQL that we'll have to run. So if we wanted to search for a specific thing such as test, we'd have to say, select all columns from the albums table where title is like test, or the artist is like test. And let's take a look at these, right? So here we have title, artist, genre. So we want to check all of these columns for our search term. So that's what's going on here. So if I look here in blue, we can see there's testing the first element in our array. And then we'd have to set up a query if there's two elements, right? And what happens if there's a third? Well, then we'd have to expand our query again to support all three terms. So you can see our SQL query is going to grow and grow and grow. And it's actually kind of hard because we need to make sure that none of these elements have, SQL injection in them, and that makes it very hard to create all the bind parameters that we would need to do in a typical SQL query that we've been doing. So, so what we have is PHP actually has these little tokens or placeholders, these question marks that we can use instead. And then what we can do is we can actually pass the array into the execute command. And I'll show you how to do all of this. But here we have our usual start. So if search terms is not empty, so if we have search terms, then our SQL command is going to be select star from albums where, right? And this is where we're going to put in our conditions. So like here, we had all these conditions that we're looking for. So if any of those things are true, return the line of code that it's on. So the way that we handle this is we're going to say SQL dot equals. So dot, in most programming languages, this would be plus equals, but it's going to append this variable, the SQL here. It's going to append that with this. And then what happens is all these question marks, the first time through the loop, the question mark's basically going to be for test, the word test. And then the second time through the loop, it's going to be for the word country. Okay, so we're going to build out this great big SQL statement with all these little question mark placeholders for words that are in our array. And then the way that we pass the words into the array is by using, typically we've just used execute brackets. What we're going to do is we're going to pass in an argument. We're going to pass in the SQL search terms to actually with the array with all the terms in it. All right. enough of the theory of how we're going to do it. Let's look at the actual code. And if at any point you want to see this code, you can go to GitHub. It is all stored online. And the way to find it is github.com/JarrettWright. And this particular repository will be this comp 1006 less than 11. So you can go in here and find this at any time. Okay. All right. So let's bring up our PHP here. All right. One quick second. Okay. So first things first, we're going to go to our albums page. Okay. So here's our albums page. And oh, I've accidentally I've loaded the wrong file. One second. Still there. One second, my apologies. Let me just do a quick. That looks better. Okay, so let's go to our albums page. So first thing we're going to do is let's add in our little search box. So I'm going to add this right underneath the albums section here. So we'll add in a form. And on here, we're going to say the action equals. Now this tells us where to redirect to once this form's been populated. And in this case, we want to stay on the same page. So I'm going to say albums.php, right? So that's the same page we're already on. So fill in the form, come right back to the same page. I'm not going to specify, usually we do like method equals post. Okay, normally we'd say post, but in this case, I want to see the search terms. It's actually very common on the web that you post the search terms. So I can write this out, or I can leave it blank because the default action is the get array. And I'm going to set up a div with one input. I'm going to call name search terms, ID equals search terms. And we'll add in a button. Search. So if now, if we look at it, there we have a box with a search item, and you can see if we hit test, you can see up here it is populating our search terms. It doesn't look so great, right? I want to do this all in one line. So I'm just going to add in some styling here now. And then we'll do something on div. And then on our actual input, we'll add in class control. Okay, now if we hit refresh, it looks a bit better. It's a little tight in here, so we can always add in with a simple little line break, give us a little more space. I'm sure people that are CSS, much stronger with CSS than I would cringe at that. Let's add a little more styling to our button as well. Okay, we hit refresh. There we go. So now our button matches our input box. You can see our search terms up here. Although it's populated, it doesn't show here. Typically, you would keep them in sync. So for example, if we search this site for laptops, gaming, what you see is here in the search query, we have our two search terms, and here we also have the search terms. But in ours, although there's something populated here, it's not reproduced here. So every time, if I wanted to now add to this, I'd have to add another word. And I'd have to type it all out again and again every time I wanted to refine my search. So what we should do is let's take from here and populate in here if information is available. So to do that, before we get to here, we have to read from our get array. So to do that, all we have to do is let's populate, we'll say if not empty. I have to define search term with an initial value. So even if there is no search terms, if this is empty, we still have to give it a value of null. Because what we're going to do is, down here in our input box, we're going to say value equals. And here, we're going to need to rely on PHP again. We're going to echo out the search terms. So I hit save. Now, if I refresh, let me just go to the albums page, right? So here's no search terms. Add in the word test. Now we can see we have search terms in our query string, and it stays persistent here, right? So this is working as we would expect. And it's not truly persistent. I mean, this page is actually reloading every time I hit search, and then it's populating it based on this. But what we need to do now is we need to actually go through and use this information inside of our where clause. So we need to actually pull this information. If we go back to our PowerPoint here. So now we need to create this kind of a query. Or if it's only 2 terms, this kind of a query, right? So if you always, every query is going to start the same. Select star from albums where, and then for every search term, we need to have the title is like whatever the term is, or the artist is like the term, or the genre is like the term. And then if there's additional terms, then we have to do it all over again. So we add in an or, and then we do it all over again. Okay, so let's build that part now. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm still on my albums page here. I'm going to scroll down. Now before, this is how we got all the albums, but there's no ability to filter whether or not we should filter or not. We don't need to reload Yeah, because we load in the header. Yeah, pretty sure. Oh, no, maybe not. That was a session. Sorry. Little aside there. So we'll just keep. We'll connect to the database. But here, we no longer can just use select star from albums, because if there's no search terms, this is what we need. But if there is search terms, then we need to add in the where conditions. So we can decide that pretty easily. You can say if empty, if the search term is empty, that's our SQL. Okay? It's pretty easy to do. If it's actually otherwise, we need to do some work. This part's going to be the same. We just have to add in search terms, right? So up here, we have search terms. Actually, I'm going to create a special one. Let's do it this way. Keep the names different. I'm going to create one called SQL search terms. Okay, so if there's no search terms, then basically we execute the command, and this is null or blank. Basically, we're not going to send any information in. But if there are search terms, then this is going to be an array that holds all the search terms that we need to fill. So if I go back to the diagram here, this will be our SQL search term, this piece here. This will be the array that holds all of our elements. So here's where we need to build out our query. So the first thing we need to do is we need to convert our string. Okay, so our query string, as the name suggests, this is a string, right? So test plus and plus explain, it's a string. So we need to convert that into an array. And the way that we do that, slide this with this. So we're going to convert this string into an array where in each position is one word. Okay, and to do that, we're going to use the explode function. So in PHP, there's this method called explode that will look for certain things. In this case, a space. Although it represents this as a space in the URL, that's really what was written was a space. So look for the space, and for each space in this array, basically explode it into a new position. So let's build that. Now, one thing that's quite fascinating about PHP is, unlike other programming languages such as Java, where they have a firm data type for their variables, PHP doesn't have that. So even though this is basically an array with a string, now we can turn it into an array with multiple strings, multiple elements in the array. And then what we're going to do down here is we need to start our SQL. So we're going to say SQL equals So that's the start of our string. If we look at our we look at our query, select star from albums where. So this part's constant no matter what. Okay. This is the bit where we're going to have to do some looping. So here I can say for each search terms as search term. Okay. So for each element inside of this array search terms, we're going to say SQL dot equals. So dot, in most program languages, it'd be plus equals, which means to add it on. But in PHP, they decided to concatenate two strings. They use dot equals. So basically, what this means is add on everything on the right to whatever was on already there. So we're going to say artist, like, question mark. Remember, the question mark is a placeholder for us, or title, like, question mark, or genre, like, question mark. So I'm going to just echo this right now, just so that we can see what we've got. Normally, you would not do this part. And we're going to get some errors and stuff, but that's fine. I just want to see how the SQL is building out. So hit refresh. And here's what we started with. So select star from albums where artists like question mark, or title like that, or genres like that. So there's there's our first term. That's probably the test. Oh, and it looks like I've got some duplication here. Here's my I did that. Oh, I see. Let's do a new line. Confusing myself a little here. Just do a little new line after each of these so that we can see on each line as we go through the loop. Actually, just even put it after the loop. See it multiple times. There we go. So what we see here is it looks correct. Select star from albums where the artist is like something, or the title, or the genre. And then here's our next search term. Now the problem is there's no or between these two elements here, right? And if I were to add an or after this, although it would work in most cases, the problem is at the end, we have an extra or. So we need to design our code to handle that situation. And the way I'm going to do it is just with a counter. I'm just going to count when I get to the third element. Word counter equals 0. For each time through the loop, plus plus just adds 1. And then I can decide if word counter is less than the size of search terms. And we'll add on. Or now we hit refresh. We've got an or between, so see. So there's our first set of search terms. And then we've got an or for our second set. And then we've got an or for our third set, but nothing at the end. So this part now works. Okay, we've created a SQL. Our SQL statement is complete. So now it's basically going to look like that. But we can't put directly in here because someone could do SQL injection on us. So what we're going to do is we use those little question marks as placeholders. And then we can prepare our SQL, and when we execute, we pass in the array, it'll perform that sanity check for us. Okay, so we no longer need to echo this out. We've seen that we have a nice array to work from. But one of the challenges at this point is that our actual our array of words isn't quite what we need just yet. So, for example, I'm just going to echo this. At this point in time of our array, here's what's inside of our array. Now the problem is, what we want inside here is percent, our search term, and the word, and another percent sign. Right? Right now, we just actually have the exact word, which means we need an exact match. If we use these percent signs, they're wildcards, which means any number of characters before or any number of characters after, as long as the test is in there in any way, it's going to be true. So we need to add those on. The other thing we have to deal with is, well, actually, let's deal with that first. So that's easy enough to deal with in what we already have. So here, let's do search terms at word counter. So, if word counter is 0, this is position 0 in our array. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to say percent sign, whatever the search term is, percent sign. Save. So now, and we go back and hit refresh, we should get percent signs on either side of all of these words, which we do. Now the problem is that we have, the example, if we had 3 search terms, we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 terms, right? So the first one needs to be duplicated 3 times. The second one needs to be duplicated 3 times, and so does the third. But if we look, we only have 3 terms. So what we really need is test, 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 and, explain, explain, explain. So to deal with that, we'll do a simple little, I'm going to create a SQL search terms. I'm going to define it, tell it it's an array. And then create a little loop. And in here, I'm going to say SQL search terms. This will basically add the search term into the array. It's, I don't love the syntax of it, but that's how PHP runs. So I'll do it 3 times, right? So for each search term, I'll add 3 of these words into the SQL search terms array. And now, if I just change this to be SQL search terms, if we rerun this now, we should get 9. So we've got test 3 times, and 3 times, and explain 3 times. And you can see, actually, it's already working because it's filtered us. There's test, and there's an and there's no explains. So let's just get rid of this echo. refresh. There we go. So we can go in and choose a little nicer image. So the minions, gotta love those guys. There we go. So, so there you have it. So now we have a nice looking set of images, and we've added a search box. And if I type in dance, JDub, and new, it'll automatically filter, and either the title, artist, or genre is going to match one of those. And if I take away a search term and hit search, it updates again. Because each time we're loading this page fresh, right? Every time you hit search, it reloads the page based on whatever's up here in our query string. So I hope that makes it clear on how to do search in PHP. And I hope you enjoyed the video. You can find, again, the results are on GitHub. This particular one is going to be Comp 1006, lesson 11. Cheers.